A big hello and welcome. It's Kate from Zen Stitching, and I'm super excited that you're joining us today for another one of our artist chats with the artists who are taking part in our Making Zen online experience. So today I'm thrilled to be joining Pippa Haynes in her studio. A big hello and welcome, Pippa.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Nice to see you. Thank you for having me back. I'm really happy to be doing Making Zen again. I was saying it's the third time I'm doing it, and it's always super fun and really great to connect with people. I've enjoyed it every single time and enjoyed making the projects as well, because it kind of gives me a bit of space and time to do something specifically for Making Zen. Obviously, I include things that I've already done. So, for example, last year it was a moss pin kit. I included my PDF for that, which is like a booklet of how to make it. But the actual project is always new. So it's always nice that it gives me a chance to actually make something and kind of concentrate on that for a bit with an excuse to doing
Yes.
so. So it's like it's easier to concentrate when you have an excuse. It's not so easy when you're kind of just doing it for fun.
Well, that's so true, isn't it? And I know I think we all fall victim to that where we've got busy lives and lots of other things that vie for our attention. And quite often the art, which is what brings us so much joy and fulfillment and groundedness as well, kind of gets put to the back burner or put at the very bottom of the to-do list, which
Yeah.
and I know I'm guilty of doing it myself. It's always like, oh, well, I got this to do and I got that to do. So I'm thrilled that Making Zen is a good excuse for you to
Yeah.
get back in the studio and do some more creating.
Yeah, definitely. It's finding time in what is very busy time at the moment. Being in the studio becomes harder, has become over the last couple of years, harder and harder, not because there's not things that I want to do, but just because life gets in the way. And also all the admin and things that come along with the studio. You sort of, everything has to not take care of itself, but you have to find ways that things will work without you being present the whole time. So yeah, it's a constant cycle of figuring out and doing new things and all of that sort of stuff. But yeah, no, Making Zen definitely gives me that chance
Yes,
to
yes.
to
Well,
actually make again.
I think as artists we wear many hats, don't we? Where
Hmm.
we're doing the creating, we're doing the marketing and the content for social media and
Yeah,
all the other little bits that happen in between. And I'm thrilled that you're back to join us for Making Zen because every time you join us, you have a wonderful project. So, like you say, this is your third time, and we
yeah,
did the moss pin last time, and the textures was part of that, if
yeah,
I recall
yeah.
correctly. And then there was, can you refresh my memory for what we did for the first time?
I think I did. I think it was a floral piece. I can't actually remember, but I think it was a floral piece. All of my pieces and all of my projects have all been kind of like nature based, which is basically what the studio does. Is it's all stitching to do with nature and things like that, which is no different from my project this year, which is on well, it's basically it's on leaves, so stitching leaves, but with the sort of undercurrent of learning how to create a realistic 3D shape that's not actually 3D, because a lot of my work is 3D work, so stump work. Which is obviously a completely different sort of style of stitching. But for this, it's more about creating that 3D feel, but on a flat piece of fabric. So it's all about thread painting and controlling your stitches and choosing colours and shapes and things like that. So yeah, it's been interesting to kind of, I guess what it's also made me do is kind of look at my process, which I almost do subconsciously. And I don't think about, oh, this is the first step, then this is the second. It just kind of happens. And actually, it's quite interesting to break it down and then look at the fundamentals of what I am actually doing in order to share it with other people. So yeah, it's about leaves, but it's also about kind of creating 3D shapes without actually being 3D. So
Yes, and I'm thrilled that you're going to be teaching this because I think this is going to open up so many people's worlds to new possibilities of stitching and creating depth on a two-dimensional surface.
yeah,
And I love hearing that you found that the teaching process that you're in the process of doing, where you're breaking down each step, is really helping you look at how your process is. Because, like you say, a lot of the stuff that we do comes intuitively. So to think logically about, well, what I do first and what I do second,
yeah.
and all that kind of stuff is really quite fascinating.
Yeah, it's definitely, I know that that's the process that I find the most interesting with my kits when I make them, because going from it being a whole piece and kind of, I'll photograph it, put it on Instagram, send like share photos and things like that. But it's the process of breaking it down and looking at all of the different steps and then photographing all of the different steps so you can see exactly how you've done it. It's funny, sometimes I find that because I do it in my head normally, I'll look at a piece and I'll think, this is how I'm going to start. It's almost like I have a conversation in my head, saying, this is how I'm going to start, this is where I'm going to go, this is this is that. I almost run through making the whole project in my head and then we'll block it out into sections, which is what I did with this. Is I sort of thought, how would I construct these pieces, and how would I create this shape with these leaves, and then blocked it out or ran it through in my head, and then put some notes on paper, and then went from there. Which is, yeah, I mean, like you said, it's interesting. It's interesting to think about the sort of processes rather than just the whole piece as a final bit, which I would share on Instagram as a photo, and then not think about it, not think about how it was made, which is like the longest part of it. Is making takes the longest, and then the final piece is sort of done.
It's
So
um it's quite interesting that you say that actually because you do like and I think we all do this when we look at all of these things that we see on Instagram. They're the finished product. And it's like, oh, that's nice, that's inspiring. I really want to make that kind of thing, but you don't think through the process of how it's made, how long it takes,
yeah,
all of those kind of things. And even just thinking about when you're learning something for the first time and you might say, oh, okay, I'm going to make that. But then through the learning process of actually making it, you understand
yeah,
and you understand the whole experience of making the project rather than a 3 second look on Instagram or
yeah.
in the art gallery or wherever you happen to be when you're looking at these final products.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that because I'm a great one, especially since having a daughter, because all I want to do is make things for her. And I see all these really sweet little projects and think, oh, yeah, what about doing that? And then you actually break it down and you think, no, no, but I'd have to do, these steps to make this. And you're watching somebody more often than not who's almost an expert at what they're doing. Like lots of people, like for example, me sharing videos of my stitching. I've been stitching for nearly 10 years. So it's kind of like I've got that behind me. Whereas, somebody who is maybe coming to it the first time with one short video, it looks like it's really simple, but actually breaking down the processes of it, it's a bit more complicated. So I've got lots of projects that I've kind of half run into and then gone, oh, this is going to take a bit longer than I actually originally thought it would. But yeah, and so there's a box of unfinished things which will eventually get finished, but might just take a bit more thinking about and a bit more time than
Yes.
I would otherwise expect.
Oh, that's right. There is the thinking time in addition to the making time, isn't there? Especially if
Yeah.
there's some problem solving or, you've got to figure out what those next steps are.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's the nice thing about doing projects like this, where it's space to let you come up with something new, which isn't necessarily something which you're always given, especially when you're trying to run your artwork as a business. That's the tricky part. Trying to do all the sort of like admin side of things whilst also keeping that space for your thinking and working through ideas, which is almost as important as doing any sort of admin, because without that there's not really anything, it takes time to come up with those ideas and space, and you do have to be in a sort of mental headspace. I know I have a lot of people who say about my kits that they buy them and then they sort of have to sit with them for a while before they start them, because for lots of people I think they find, obviously being mainly working in stump work, it's quite a a different form of embroidery, so it's a bit alien to certain people, especially if you haven't seen it before. It's not because it's completely 3D, kind of, it's not what you're expecting when you think about embroidery. And some people get quite nervous about it and have to sit with it for a while to get into the mental sort of frame of mind to be able to sit and begin stitching. And it's not like it's super, super complicated, but it's just having that space to be able to work through something and not feel rushed, or, I think you need that with art, any type of art, really, to be honest.
I completely agree, and it's something that I think we all catch ourselves doing, and that is when we're doing something new for the first time, particularly in art, and we're following along to a lesson or something like that. We expect that despite it being our first time, it's going to look exactly like the way the instructor has demonstrated in the
Yeah,
video. And then you kind of have a little bit of a moment of like, oh, this
yeah,
this isn't as easy as it looks. And like you
yeah,
say, you've been doing it for 10 years, so you've got an intuition for what you do,
yeah.
a muscle memory, I guess, as well, just
Hmm.
from making and creating. So I do think it's really important to give ourselves the grace to allow our first attempts at anything to be first attempts
Yeah,
and not masterpieces, because I heard this great analogy. We don't, if we were playing soccer, for example, we don't run onto the soccer field and expect to be able to play like Beckham,
yeah,
without
yeah,
having never kicked a ball before. So why do we put the same kind of pressure on ourselves to make art? So I think sitting with the project, like what you're saying, many of your students do, and just kind of there's a thinking time
yeah.
along with things, in addition to the creation time as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the biggest things that I've learned, especially since setting up the studio, is you will never arrive at your own sort of style and design from the very beginning. It's like a constant work in progress, because when you look at somebody and they've done this project and you think, oh my gosh, that project's amazing, I wish I could make something like that, that's for as a result of all of their previous work that they have worked through and they have created, which has kind of layered on top of each other to make this style, or this, this way of doing things, their specific style, their specific design, which you could never recreate just from sitting down once. And I know that when I started the studio, it was very much like I found myself trying to make myself into something, and do I saw a style of embroidery and I thought, that's exactly how I want to stitch because that looks amazing. And what you don't realize is actually what you've got to do is just have a constant process of making and developing and working on things, and then you kind of begin to reach a stage of knowing what your own style is, to then be able to create things that people might look at as well and go, oh, I wish I could create something like that. It's sort of like a big circle that goes round and round. And I think I found I really struggled with that at first, because I kept thinking, what's my style? What do I do? What's my sort of creating point?
Mm.
And actually, what you had to do is just time and work through it, and keep developing your ideas and things like that. And then you kind of begin to reach this point where it's more solid. I still would say I've got, so much more developing to do and so many more places to go with it. But it's a constant process.
It is, and I think that's something that's it's nice that you're bringing that up because it is a constant process. And I think as artists, we're always curious. You know, there's always a what happens if moment whenever we're doing something, and that's what keeps that creativity alive. It keeps the magic alive, and it keeps the enthusiasm. You know,
Yeah,
because you for me anyway, I like the unknown. I like stepping into that and seeing what's going to happen. Sometimes it works,
yeah,
sometimes it doesn't, but
yeah,
it's that unknown that keeps it interesting. I think if I knew what I was going to do all the time and the outcome that it was going to bring, I'd kind of get bored.
yeah. I know. I mean, it's like I know that in my kits at the beginning of all the booklets, I always say you got to kind of learn to enjoy the process of it, because like I said earlier, the process is such a long part of it. And
Mm,
then once you've created the piece, you've created the piece and you've got a piece of artwork. But it's the process that does the real work, and
mm,
it's the process that does the real work in terms of like headspace and finding time for yourself and creating. Like, that's the thing that you're really working on. It's not necessarily, in my mind, it's not necessarily the final piece. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've made pieces where it's like, this is what I want to create, and I've made it, and it's like, great, I'm so glad I did that. But the majority of it is learning how to kind of like move through the making of it and learn stuff from that, learn something from the process, basically,
yeah,
I
yeah.
think.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think, and the phrase that comes to mind is it's the journey, not the destination.
Yeah, exactly.
And I always, because when I was younger, I'd make projects and I didn't really care about the process. It was all about the end result. And so I'd
Yeah,
give myself these unrealistic deadlines and I'd try and meet them and wear myself out in the process and not enjoy the project. And then I had this realization where I'm like, oh, you know, if you actually slow down, it's very enjoyable. Perhaps you should enjoy the process just as much as the final product. And that
yeah,
really did change how I approached things, and it brought a level of enjoyment that I perhaps maybe didn't have as
yeah,
much before. Because there's always enjoyment in creation, whether it's deadlines or not. There's
yeah.
always something fun.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It's just, yeah, learning to be in the process, and it's about being patient as well, which I'm quite bad at sometimes. So you sort of always have, or for me at least, I always have it goes from really excited about a project, I've got loads of ideas, my brain is going fizzing away, and then you begin the project and it's really good and you're seeing everything come to life and you think, yes, this is the way it's going. And then it gets to the middle of the project and you think, oh my gosh, why did I do this? This is going on forever. When is it going to finish? All I want is that final piece. And then you get to this bit just before, I always find it's the bit just before the end. For me, with the stump work pieces, it's when everything's been stitched but it hasn't yet been kind of like built together. So you're like on the cusp of finishing it, but you've done all the really hard, sort of like the repetitive work, and then you're about to put it all together. And that's my favorite part, I think, because it's not yet finished, so the project's still ongoing, but you've done all the like hard work, all the legwork, and then you get to kind of like put it all together and you watch it all kind of, I don't know, come alive, sort of thing. Which
Yeah,
is, yeah, that's my favourite part. But it is always, without fail, it's always that process, and there's always that bit in the middle where you go, oh my god, I hate this. Or not hate it, but it's just kind of, it begins to wear on you a bit and you think, will this ever be finished? And you have to keep some sort of enthusiasm for it.
yeah.
Yeah.
What are your tips on when people get to that point in a project to get through? Do you have any like self-talk or ways that you kind of reward yourself for doing bits?
I listen to lots of podcasts. I listen to lots of podcasts, and also sometimes if you need a break, you need a break. Go back to it, and often if I'm really struggling with a project and I've just kind of go away and have a break, you come back to it with a slightly different view because you've kind of gone away, let it percolate slightly, and then come back. And I find that with that you kind of you build more on the project that you were doing, rather than sometimes pushing through isn't necessarily the best way. So set it aside, go do something else, even for a few days or so, something like that, and then go back to it. And yeah, more often than not, then you've managed. I find I've managed to build up a bit more enthusiasm, and then you can kind of get through the last bit. But yeah, no, I listen to lots of podcasts.
I love hearing that, and I love hearing the process, particularly your advice on putting it down and stepping away, and rather than pushing through, because I know from my experience, when I push through a project, I either do it wrong or make a mistake, or something's not quite right. I'm not in the zone. I'm not feeling the
Yeah,
zen. And it shows that the result is tangible in front of me. Whereas if I put it down and I step away and do something else for a bit, like you say, it's percolating in the background. So you might even come up with a better way of doing things or another way of approaching it, depending on
yeah.
what the project is. And then, yeah, you kind of got this renewed vigor and energy to approach the project again once you've had some contemplation time.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. I think that's putting things aside. I mean, sometimes I've put things aside and they have sat there for quite a while, but more often than not, if it's a serious project that I've been considering, I will go back to it, even if it's sort of a long period of time. You kind of have it sat there in the background, and you think, oh yeah, one day I'll do that. Like, hopefully.
Well, I think sometimes some projects more than others have a longer gestation period, don't they? Where they just kind of sit there, and when the moment's right, you'll return to them
Yeah,
and recreate them or continue that creative journey.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
And I loved hearing that one of it's almost like a treat, I would say, when you're doing your stitching, is you listen to podcasts, because
Yeah,
that's a great way to kind of take your mind and be doing something enjoyable whilst the fingers are working away as
yeah,
well. Do
yeah.
you have favorite podcasts that you like to listen to?
Oh God, to be honest, I listen to a very eclectic mix of podcasts, but it's often like I listen to the sort of like 8 part sort of like solve if they're what was one that I was listening to? It's called The Con Queen or something like that, and it was about a lady who embezzled a whole load of money. It's all like crazy stories and things like that, because I think that when it's something that's so different, it's really easy to for like I find it very easy to kind of like go into that podcast and be listening to all the interviews and finding them really interesting and things like that, rather than if it's something that's sort of in the news.
Mm.
Sometimes it's a bit too real. You know what I mean.
Mm.
Sometimes it's nice to kind of remove yourself from that and listen to some crazy wacky story where you can't quite believe that it's happened. And yeah, it's always that's the
Yeah.
sort of stuff I listen to.
And
So
listening is a great thing to do as makers as well, because it means that we can be engaged with the audio senses, and yet the fingers can be busy. Like I find in front of the television, as much as I enjoy sitting down and watching something, I can't focus on the two things at once. My eyes are either on the screen or
yeah,
they're on the project in front of me, and inevitably they're on the project when something interesting is happening on the screen.
yeah,
So you miss those
yeah,
important points. So having just something that's an audio in the background is a great way of doing it.
yeah, definitely. I do a lot of listening to the TV,
Yeah, me too.
not watching, which drives my husband absolutely mad. But oh well.
That's right, exactly. Not so good for when we're watching foreign movies.
Yeah, I know. It kind of removes that genre of film or TV. You can't really
Totally.
do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And something that you said early, Pip, about the projects that you make and what you create, they're all nature inspired.
Yeah.
And I'd love to know, how do you get your inspiration? Do you go for walks? Do you visit your garden? Or are there special places that you like to go?
Oh, it's from all sorts because, well, I moved to the countryside. I used to live in London, moved to the countryside, married a farmer, so very much in sort of like the nature countryside area. Um, I've got a dog who's currently asleep behind me, so take her for walks all the time. We've got woodlands around here, everything, and now with my daughter, she comes and helps me in the garden. Sometimes sort of helps, um, pulls things apart. And I love gardening. I love gardening. I love growing my own veg and things like that. So it kind of all comes from that. It was I started it. I started the studio when I was living in London, and almost it was started as a through a desire to be more connected with nature. And then it just developed from when I moved to the countryside. Then I was sort of there, and then you can take full advantage of it and sort of explore it more closely and more directly, I think, now. So that's kind of, yeah, that's basically where it came from, where I live, what we do as a family, all of that sort of stuff is kind of just intertwined very much.
And that's, I'm guessing, how Lemon Pepper Studio came about.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, it came about because I was working in set design and I had a break in jobs for a bit. And instead of just kind of sitting around on the sofa, I thought, oh, I'll pick something up and have a go at doing some embroidery. Because I think I'd seen a few photos on Instagram or something like that. And then, yeah, picked it up and I was kind of like, oh, I like this. And I like the portableness of it in a way. You know, you can sort of, if you've got a small project, you put it in a bag. I know I've got a bag which I have. If I this is the size of the bag that I have, that I carry most of my projects around in. It's just a really simple canvas bag, and if I'm kind of like going on a train journey or anything like that, you just pop everything in there and it literally goes in a handbag, and then you can sit and do it, and it's not a big thing
Yeah.
that you've got to lug around with you.
There's a lot to be said about that. I love that for stitching as well. It's portability and the ability to put everything into a small case and travel
Yeah,
with it. And, you can either do it whilst you're traveling or whilst you're waiting, or, there's so many opportunities because there's not a great need for a lot of space or a lot of materials or equipment or anything like that.
yeah, definitely, definitely. It's very portable. Looking forward to getting my project done and then, yeah, sharing it with everyone.
Yes, seeing lots of beautiful stitched, painted stitching, I think it is, colour work.
Yeah, thread painting and things like that. I mean, I have a quick example here, which I can show before I go, which is this is a piece I was working on and part of what inspired what I was thinking about doing. But I created these forget-me-nots and they started off, I don't know if you can see with the leaves, and here, especially this one, just here, with the movement of the leaves, and then kind of develop some smaller pieces. So here, this one was one that I was working on, and just working on kind of like the shape of them, the color of them, the movement of them, and that sort of stuff. So that was what inspired it. So yeah, well, I'm looking forward to sharing what I've got.
I can't wait. I'm super excited. I'm thrilled that it's also given you a good excuse slash reason to get back into the studio
Yeah,
and do some more creating as well, because it's good food for the soul.
it is. It really is. Definitely.
Thank you for joining me in this creative journey. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And if you'd like to learn more about Making Zen, please check out the links below where you can find out all about the workshops and creativity, community, and all that kind of good stuff. Wishing you many happy hours of stitching.